right, welcome back. We are going to continue with loops. Last time in the previous videos, we talked about while loops. And today we are going to focus on for loops. But the concept for both of them are exactly the same. You have some expressions that you're checking, and then if that expression is true, you're going to go through some statements. As soon as it is false, you're done with that loop and you terminate that loop. You continue with the rest of your program. The difference between while and for loop is that while loop is very general. If you want to write any type of loop, if there is some patterns and you want to use a loop to create something, while loop is something that you can always use. When it comes to for loop, you are limited to sequences. So you only can use for loops if you have a sequence. So sometimes sequences are available to you and sometimes you have to create them yourself. So we are going to talk about that and see how we can use a for loop and how similar they are when you compare them. So let's review the while loop steps for a second because some of the steps are same for both of them. So when we were writing a while loop, we had 4 steps that we needed to follow exactly as the order they come. So step 1, you have your conditional variables. You set them up, you initialize them, so you have something to be able to set your conditions. So, and then you have your while keyword, and then you put your conditions. It could be one condition, it could be multiple conditions, depending on the problem that you have. And then inside your while loop block, you're going to have your statements. The last line in your while loop is going to be updating that conditional variables that you use to put your condition. So you're changing that condition as your loop is kind of iterating to at some point stops the loop. Otherwise, it's going to be an infinite loop if you never update that conditional variables. So always keep these 4 steps in your head, in your mind, and make sure you follow them. Again, depending on different problems, and as you get better at programming, you might want to change them, but for this class, make sure you follow all of those 4 steps as they are and in the order they come. So when it comes to for loop, we are going to basically have all of these steps, but 3 of them are going to be combined into one line. So we are going to have the for loop header, and then the initialization, the condition, and the update are going to be all in one line. So let's see how it is done. So in the previous example, what we had was we had a sequence and we went through that sequence and printed all of the elements in that sequence. So if I run this one, and this is a while loop, it goes through and prints all of the values that we have. So now we want to change this one and create a for loop to do the exact same thing for us. So with for loop, we use the keyword for to do that. So you have the for, which is the loop that you're creating. And right here, what we are going to do is we are going to create our conditional variable to basically go through and print this stuff. So I'm going to call it x. So I'm going to have that there as it is, just x. I'm saying this is the conditional variables I'm going to create. And then I'm going to put this variable, this keyword in, which is a membership operator for x in the sequence that we have. So what happens in this line is this x is going to go through the sequence that we have here. So let's just go with something simpler. Let's just put some numbers. So it's going to go through the sequence, so 3, 4, and 6. Is going to assign the first value in that sequence into this variable x. So x is going to be equal to string 3 first. And then in the next iteration, x is going to be assigned a string 4. And then in the next iteration, x is going to be assigned a string 6. So as it goes, it basically do that assignment for you automatically. You don't need to worry about any of them. You just give it a name, and then you pass your sequence to it, and it does everything for you. Initialize a variable, it updates the variable, and goes through all of the values in that sequence for you one by one in the order they come in that sequence. So you don't need to worry about any of those kind of stuff. It just does it for you. And then I can simply say print that X for me. So if I run this one, it's going to go through all of those elements and print them for me. This sequence could be anything. Let's go back to our hello world. And it's going to go through and print them, all right? So it could be a tuple, it could be a list. So you can check it with different type of sequences that we learned so far, and then it basically goes through and print everything for you. So as you see, those 3 steps that we had, the initialization, the condition, and then the update are all done in this line for you. So for loop does that for you. You don't have to worry about any of them. So it goes through, takes every single element, every single item that you have in your sequence, and assigns them into this variable X that you gave to for. So you just need to pick a name. It could be anything. So you want to call it item, and it basically use that variable to go through all of the elements, all of the items that you have in your sequence. Okay, so this is a simple example of using a for loop to go through the items in a sequence. So this type of iteration, we call that iterating using an item. So you're using the item itself to go through a sequence and print the items, print the elements in that sequence. So as you see, I'm directly taking each element in that sequence and printing them. And you see it is very short because most of this stuff is done in the header for you, and you don't need to worry about any of them. So having going through that sequence took you at least 4 lines using a while loop, but doing the exact same thing takes you 2 lines using a for loop. But again, for loops are limited. You must have a sequence to be able to traverse over it and take the elements and print them. But if you have a sequence, usually for loops are very, very simple. So in this example, again, we are traversing using an item. But let's say we have a different example. So I'm going to put it here. Okay, so let's say now I have this example of printing. I want you to print all the values from 1 to 10, right? So printing all of the values from 1 to 10. When we have a while loop, when we use a while loop, it was very simple. You start from 1 and you set your end value to 10. You go through and print all of those values, and you basically increment as you go. How we can do that using a for loop? So with for loops, we must have a sequence. So if you want to create something like that, let's say, okay, I want to print all of the values from 1 to 10. I'm going to create my sequence, and I'm going to store all of the values 1 to 10 in it, all right? 9 and 10, all right? Now I can simply say this statement here, and that's going to basically go through that sequence and print all of the items for me. But let's say I want to print all of the items from 1 to 1 million, right? That doesn't make any sense for me to create that sequence first, like have all of those numbers, store them in a tuple or a list, and then go through them. That's time consuming, and that is not the point of using programming. There is a simpler way that you can create and generate a range of numbers, and that is using a function that we call range. So you can use this function range that generates a range of numbers for you. So let's see how it is done. So I'm going to get rid of this one, and we are going to go to the shell to practice that, and then we are going to go to the for loop to practice with it. So when it comes to range, there are 3 different ways that you can use a range function. I'm going to start with the most general way of using range function. So you can pass, range function takes up to 3 values when it comes to passing information to it. So the information it has, it could be, all right. So the first value that you pass to it is the start value. The second value is your end value, and the third value is your step, okay? So start, end, or stop, and a step. So you're telling range function what value you want to start with, what value when you want to stop, and then what are your steps. So let's see an example of it. Let's say I want to start from 1. I want to go all the way to 10, and I want to take the steps of 1. Right? So that means 1 and then 2, then 3, then 4, and so on until you get to 10. One thing that you need to pay attention and just remember is with range function, the stop value or end value is not included, it's excluded. So when you go from 1 to 10, that means you're literally going from 1 to 9. So if you do this one, it's going to generate, let's see, print it. 1, 10, and step of 1. See if it shows the, so it's type range, so it doesn't, we have to put it inside. Oh, actually, I can do this. Create a list of this range, and then it prints that for us. Because it is type range, and with type range, you don't see, it just shows you that type range. But if you create a list out of that range, it's going to give you the numbers that it generates. So we have 1 to 9 here. And as you see, 10 is not included. If I tried this one again and go to 11 instead, then 10 is going to be included. So if you want to go 1 to 10, then make sure your end value is 1 above the value that you have or 1 beyond it, depending on what your step is. If you want to take different step, you can do that. So let's say you want to print all of the odd numbers from 1 to 10. So I'm going to say, take a step of 2. So that means 1, 3, 5, and so on and so forth until you get to 10. So it's going to basically take this and jump and skip one value at a time as you're printing. So let's say you want to print all of the even numbers. So make sure you start from the first even number, and then you jump to as you go. It's going to print all of the even numbers for you. So range function is a very helpful function to create a range of numbers for you depending on your needs. You can also go backward if you want. So let's say you want to print numbers 10 to 1. So you simply start from 10. So we start from 10. We want to get to 1. We are going to talk about that, what value you need to pick. And since you're going to go backward, you make sure that your step is negative. So if you want to go from 10 to 9, you're taking a step of -1. So you're subtracting 1 from 10 to get to 9. So your step should be negative. So from 10 to 1, taking the step of -1. So if we do that, it's going to show us all of the numbers from 10 to 2 because the stop value is not included. So what our stop value should be. Pause this video, practice with that, and see if you can print all of the numbers from 10 to 1, going negative, taking negative a step. And then unpause the video and see how it is done. All right, hopefully you were able to do this one. So when it comes to negative numbers or taking negative steps, or positive steps, it doesn't matter. Whatever direction that you go, you need to think about going beyond your end value. So if you're going positive steps, if you're taking positive steps, you go beyond, and beyond is positive. If you're going to in a negative direction, your beyond is 1 less, okay? Not 1 more. If you go positive, it's 1 more. If you go negative, it's less. So if my step is -1, I want to go 1 less than this one. So I use my negative steps to calculate my stop value. So 1 minus 1 is going to give me 0. You can leave it as 1 minus 1 if you want to. Or you can directly put 0 here. So either one is going to work, and it's going to give you what you need to have. If your step is positive, then you do the exact same thing, like similar to here. So we were going from 1 to 10, and you basically want to go 1 above, 1 beyond the end value to include your whatever value that you have if you want 10 to be included. So you can always play with that and use the step to calculate your end value. So let's say you want to have this end value, use the step and add that step to your end value. Okay, so we have that range function. Now let's go back to our program and use that to create our sequence. So let's say I want to print all of the values from 1 to 10. So I'm going to say for, again, we are going to create a variable here. Just say, okay, this X variable that we have in a certain range. So my range, I want to print all of the values from 1 to 10. So I put my start value, my end value, and my step. And I'm going to say, okay, now print that X for me. All right, so if you do that, it's going to basically go ahead and create all of the numbers from 1 to 9 in this example, because I put 10 as my end value. So if you want to include 10, you need to go 1 beyond your stop value, and it will include your the end value that you desire. Okay, so there's the range function. So a couple of things about range function. First of all, you can pass 2 values or 1 value to range function. So let's say we want to print all of the values from 0 to 10. If you do that, it's going to go from 0 all the way to 10. By default, in this example, we are taking a step 1. By default, the step is 1. So if you have the step of 1, you can just take it out. You don't have to include it. It basically use a default value, which is 1 for you. So it does the exact same thing for us. If your start value is 0, that's the default value. So you can leave it out and just pass the stop to your range function. It's going to technically go through all of the values from 0 to the end value that you have. Okay? So let's say we want to print all of the values from 0 to 4. Then we pass value 5 to it, and then it prints 0 to 4 for us. There are 5 values in it. Okay, so there are reasons why the start value is 0, and that goes back, one of the reasons is in Python, we have all of the sequences are 0 indexed. So the start value is 0. So if you have a sequence such as this one, I'm going to put it here, and you want to go through all of the elements in the sequence, you simply need to figure out all of the index numbers, similar to what we had here. So to print all of the values in your sequence, you generated all of the index numbers. You can do that simply by a range function. So you have your sequence, you say, okay, from range function, you have 0, 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to pass this value 4 to it and say, okay, generate all of those index numbers for me. So if you do that, it's going to give you index number 0, 1, 2, and 3. So now you can say, okay, this is my index number. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and call it IDX for clarity. And here I'm going to say, okay, sequence IDX. So that way, we are going to see the index number and the value in that index number. Index number 1, value 7, index number 2, value 1, and so on and so forth. So you see all of that. So, and we did that using a range function. With range, we generated all of the index numbers. And we can look at some of the similarities between the two. So with the range function, the default value is 0. So, or we can put that here actually. So I'm going to put 0 here and then 1 here. So we're starting from 0. We are going to go all the way to the length of that sequence, which can replace it here. Say, okay, whatever that length is, I want you to use that as a stop value. And that is another nice thing about why stop value is not included, because length value gives you the number of items that you have. So you have 4 items here, and the length is 4. So if you go 0 to 4, that means index number 0, 1, 2, and 3, not including 4. So that works perfectly well with range functions. So you start from 0, and you go all the way to length of that sequence. And your step is 1 here in this example, okay? So you can go from one to the other, and you can see the similarities between the two. All right, if you run this one, this should work exactly the same, because we just changed them and made them more general. So now if you add more items to this one, it should be automatic. Basically, since we're using the len function, it goes through all of the items that you have in your sequence and take them and prints them for you.